I'm in the council chamber in the state apartments of the Royal Hospital Chelsea. This is the home of the Chelsea pensioners, and I'm so delighted to be chatting today with Brian Connor, who's had a career in intelligence. Brian, it's marvellous to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I just wish it was mine.
I mean, they really are grand surroundings.
They are. They're 330 years old now, so they've been here a long time.
And I'm here, of course, to talk to you about your career. You started in the Ordnance Corps, and then you were transferred to the Intelligence Corps. So how did that come about?
When I first joined the Ordnance Corps, my first posting as a 17-and-a-half-year-old was to Bahrain to an Intelligence Corps unit as their clerical support. And I finished there and I went posted to Germany for 2 years, and I got posted to Aldershot to another Intelligence Corps unit. And I saw that both I enjoyed all the reading that I was doing, writing reports and everything else, but also that I was a private and the other members of the Intelligence Corps coming straight out of Ashford as Lance Corporals and on a higher pay band than me. So I thought, if you can't beat them, join them.
So that was your kind of incentive, if you like, but primarily that you enjoyed the work.
I did, yes, yeah. Although at that time most of it was in the security sector, they were both security units, but I got a feel for the wider sphere that the Intelligence Corps worked in.
So what about the training then, the balance between intelligence and security? Can you tell me something about the kind of training? Because
the trade I was in, which was classed as operator intelligence and security, it's very much 50-50. Although there was elements like, for example, every Intelligence Corps operator did basic photography. Nothing major, just basic photography. I think you taught the basics of intelligence gathering, analysis, and then again security, doing risk analysis, assessing facilities and that, to make sure that you met things like the threat, terrorist threat, and even at that time in the Cold War, the security threat if there were to be any form of conflict. So that's how you basically combined your expertise as a photographer with your intelligence and security duties? Not quite, because when I first joined the Intelligence Corps, all photography, or majority of photography, was done by Royal Army Ordnance Corps photographers, which was their own trade. And they, a bit like staff clerks doing the clerical support, photographers were at that time attached to Intelligence Corps units to do the photography. Right. But it was then decided that it would make more sense for the Intelligence Corps personnel to be trained as proper, if you like, close-on professional photographers. So they then took over all the intelligence-based photography posts, and a number of us went to the Joint School of Photography to do exactly the same course that the Ordnance Corps photographers did. So starting with the old black box with the hood over your head, plate cameras and everything else, and then developing in to where modern camera as it was at the time. Yes. And then I then got posted into jobs which required a combination of my photographic training and the intelligence or security skills. So can we talk a bit more about that? How the specific work you did as a photographer impacted on maybe examples of intelligence and security? Is there anything you can think of particularly where this was crucial? Yeah, I think the two main ones, one of my postings was to Hereford with the Special Air Service, to the Intelligence Corps Intelligence and Security section in Hereford. It was a bit ironic that the Intelligence Corps were providing security for the Special Air Service, but there I was classed as their operational photographer, so whenever there was any operations being planned or considered, they would need the intelligence from photography. Now that may be aerial photography, where I would be out flying over areas as discreetly as possible in some cases. This happened in Northern Ireland, where I was detached with them. So you're using the photography to identify areas where they can observe and gain the intelligence from the ground of what obstacles there may be or what they're targeting, that sort of thing. So it's using photography as an intelligence tool and not just image capturing. So this would be different than
for example, what the RAF would be doing in intelligence and aerial photography, or is it parallel and related?
In some ways it's the same, but rarely did we use the RAF to provide photography for in the work I was doing. Obviously, a lot of it is because you're involved in the intelligence world. It's a case of you tend to try and reduce the number of people involved in knowing what's going on, because the old saying that, you know, a secret's only a secret while only one person knows it. As long as somebody else knows it, it's no longer a secret. And
that makes sense. Yeah. So what was the most enjoyable part of that work for you? Any specific examples of that period?
I must admit, from the photography side, my favourite was flying. I used to do a lot of flying. I had a very good friend in the Army Air called Pete Bird, who was my ironic name as a pilot.
Yes.
I used to do a lot of flying with him, both in Northern Ireland and in Hereford, doing work with them, and I just loved it. And it was fun. I enjoyed the photography to the point that I even carried it on when I left the Army into Civvy Street, and I'm now the photographer at the Royal Hospital as well.
Oh, that's marvellous, isn't it? So the role of photographer becomes your primary role as an intelligence officer, whereas of course you hadn't started out from that perspective.
Only in certain jobs. I then went on to other jobs, which didn't necessarily involve photography, or it was a minor role. It was, my main role would have been more in the intelligence gathering, analysis side. So the photography took a step back, whereas in Hereford particularly, it was my main role.
Ah, interesting. And so can you tell me a bit about that period, that later period, when you're conducting other kinds of intelligence?
I got posted to Hong Kong in 1982, and with my family went over there and enjoyed it. And I saw an opportunity because at this time we still had the Sino-Hong Kong border. We had illegal immigration. We had the British Army were providing infantry support along the border to prevent it. But we also had people, mainland Chinese people, getting through. And so the intelligence corps had a role in, it was classed as interrogation of illegal immigrants, basically to gather intelligence on what we could, on what was happening in mainland China. And that appealed to me, both having to be able to learn the language, but then to put it into practice. So having completed the first tour I was on, which was predominantly security based, I then elected to go back to Hong Kong and did time at the Ministry of Defence Chinese Language School learning Mandarin.
Right.
Following that, I then went and worked on the China-Hong Kong border, interviewing these illegal immigrants to find out what we could. I prefer to use the word interview. Interrogation tends to bring up images of cigarette burns on the back of the hand and nails being pulled out by pliers, and so we didn't do any of that.
No,
I promise.
I hope not. That's against the Geneva Convention. So Mandarin as opposed to Cantonese then?
Yeah. Two reasons. We had in Hong Kong, we had the Hong Kong Military Service Corps, which were in support of the British forces, and they were predominantly Hong Kong nationals, as we call them. Cantonese was then their mother language, which is only spoken in the south of China, in Canton province and in Hong Kong. You've got the rest of China, which is massive. So there was a need to have that Mandarin capability. And the majority of illegal immigrants were coming from north of Canton. Canton had a large influence from Hong Kong, of the capitalist world, and therefore it was the people from mainland China. Where you go into the depths of China, you've got some real poverty, but they know about what's going on outside, and they want some of that. So they were the people that trying to get into Hong Kong to get that better life.
Oh yes, so now I understand. So today we would call it for economic reasons, migrants.
Yeah.
So these could potentially prove to be of a security concern, I guess.
Both a security, but also intelligence advantage, because you'd have ex-China People's Liberation Army, PLA soldiers coming over, Navy. So any information we could get from them would be useful. And that was the main thrust of our our interviews.
And so they would have seen that as being quite sort of friendly, and they would be quite helpful in the information they volunteered?
Initially, most of them were a bit reluctant when you've got what they call a guaylo, a white ghost, which is how they referred to your white foreigner. They'd be a bit reluctant, particularly when you started speaking Chinese. As part of my training, I had to go into China, and I went to a place called Suzhou. And I was probably one of the first few white people they'd ever seen there. And when I started speaking Mandarin, the look of shock on their face, and it was almost a case of, hang on, what's this guy after? Who is this guy?
Yes.
You know, it was suspicion. And it's, again, because they've been arrested by the military on the border, there's an element of fear, reluctance. When you're interviewing these people, you've got to build a relationship. You've got to try and relax them so they trust you. And turn it, as I said, it's an interview, and if you can, you turn it into a conversation where they do feel relaxed, and if you like, they forget that they're being asked about stuff that we've got an interest in, and they forget worrying about it.
So the work is fairly long term, is it, in respect of building trust between these sources?
It depends on how long and what they've got. I mean, we could get through dozens of interviews a day because it's you tend to be able to tell very quickly. Particularly, we would always have a Hong Kong Military Service Corps guy, or normally with us, and quite often they will do the initial chatting and relaxing of the individual, and very quickly can identify whether that person is going to have any information that we could use. So quite often you'll be looking maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then you get somebody who you could want to talk to for 2 or 3 days because of what they've got, and quite often it'll be a case of teasing out of them the greater detail.
So are you able to talk about, to give us an idea, because it's a long time ago for a contemporary audience to understand what the issues were at that point in the Cold War, and sort of the kind of intelligence you're needing, that what was the threat, I suppose I'm asking, really?
Well, from a Cold War perspective, we're talking about Europe. And obviously there we were talking about the NATO against the Warsaw Pact. And over there, obviously in Europe, it was a case of identifying sources which weren't sort of captured. They had to be, for want of a better phrase, volunteers, or finding somebody who you could become friends with, who you believed had information about any of the countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact and the USSR, to be able to get information regarding deployment of troops, any exercises that have been taking place. We didn't have, whilst we would know about them from defence resources and that, getting maybe some of the more down-to-earth and grounded detail would be useful. So it was a case of that, if you like, that source handling, and this led us into the Northern Ireland situation, where source handling was a very, very vital part of the intelligence gathering process, because without those people, a lot more could have gone wrong, and we could have lost a lot more people, both civilian and military, because we didn't have that information up front. But again, it is that sensitivity around it.
So when you reflect back, are there intelligence lessons to be learnt, particularly with your experience during the Cold War? Are there any moments when you feel that there were intelligence gains or even mistakes that could be learnt from?
It's like in all walks, there's always things you could do better. And because you're dealing with people, every single person is different. So you could perhaps fall into a trap of thinking, well, I did all right with that person, so I'll use the same technique on this person. Doesn't work. You've got to understand your subject, and that's where this building the relationship is very important. With regards to other aspects, again, having got the information, you've got to analyse it. You've got to make sure the analysis is objective and not subjective. So that you're looking at a clear picture rather than allowing your own personal interpretation on it. Yes, you will be interpreting it, but you've got to look at it from a wider picture. and then analyse it, both from a historical perspective, where it's come from, and what it may lead to, and who's going to be able to make use of it.
So it's multi-layered.
Very much so, yes.
Use of intelligence and analysis, which presumably is part of a team.
Generally, yes. You'd have anything you do will come back to a team. You present it, and then be a wider analysis for other people to challenge perhaps your view. So that it may be that somehow you've allowed subjectivity to come into it. They will be able to challenge it from their perspective and say, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't sit based on this. And it may be you've got three or four of you have all got different sources of information, which come into either conflict or actually back the other person up. So it's bringing it all together to give you that overall picture of the circumstances and situation you're going to find yourself in.
It's a very organic process, isn't it?
Yes.
We tend to think of it being quite a rigid, sometimes I think, but certainly as an academic studying it, sometimes it comes across as quite kind of rigid and obvious in hindsight working as a historian. But if you're actually conducting the intelligence work, then it is a very organic process.
Yes, it is. I mean, if you start putting rules in place, too rigorous rules in place, you're going to end up with this subjectivity, and it's no longer intelligence. It's just information. Intelligence is broader than within that framework. That's why they've always said, in interrogation, torture doesn't work. Because if I'm pulling your fingers out, you're going to tell me what you think I want to hear. And if I believe that, then I haven't got intelligence. I've got false news, fake news. So it's very important. That's why you always hear that, as I say, I use the word interview rather than interrogation, because it does have this connotation of forcing information out. As long as you force it, you're not getting the truth, you're getting what they want you to hear.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital, isn't it, to be reminded of that in contemporary times. So what happens after your time in Hong Kong? Because presumably you were there for several years. Yeah,
overall I did 9 years in Hong Kong. My children grew up out there. I mean, by the time they were 18, half their life had been in Hong Kong, and they didn't complain about it. It was, but by that time I'd finished 23 years in the army. Unfortunately, this was a time when the MOD brought in the first, what they called options for change, which was the reduction in forces, or as the Americans call it, the RIF. Unfortunately, because I'd done 23 years, I was going on to extended service, and while they were making people redundant, they stopped that extended service. So I was, if you like, forced out, having hoped to go on for a full career till 55. It was, from my perspective, it was cut short. So I actually retired from Hong Kong. So I left Hong Kong. Flew out from Kai Tak Airport as a W02, and I landed at Heathrow as Mr.
Oh, and so then in civilian life, can I ask what you did, presumably still with your photography? I did.
Initially, I became a security consultant, running my own company, and then I got attracted by Capital One, the financial company, to when they were launched, to become their director of international security, again based on the security side that I'd done in the intelligence corps. And I stayed in the security world until my retirement. Well, it developed from pure security into the broader risk management aspects, till I basically retired early at age 59. Nobody would hire me because I was either, in their words, too experienced or too expensive. So I took semi-retirement, but ended up mainly doing charity work.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So can I ask you finally then, if you look back on your career in intelligence and security, or your time as the photographer, are there the highlights? What for you are the highlights, those moments in your career?
I know it's a sensitive subject, but one of them was with when I was detached to 22 SS in Northern Ireland. You felt you were doing something positive. There was more reason behind it. A lot of what you do elsewhere at the time it was like, it was exercise, it was preparation, it was planning. Whereas with that, it was real time work. You felt you were achieving something. The other one was in Hong Kong. The environment, the lifestyle, it was just, you got paid to go on leave, but people found absurd. You're living in this wonderful environment. You're getting paid an overseas allowance, and then they give you more money to go on holiday to Bali or the Maldives, which was wonderful.
Yeah. So very, very special moments in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were the best 23 years of my life, and then coming into the Royal Hospital Chelsea as a Chelsea pensioner, it was like stepping back in time, because you're going back into that environment where you've got 300 people who were in a similar position to you, and the majority of people in here were career soldiers. So you've got that, and so that atmosphere still exists here.
Of course, the war veterans of all conflicts, and especially the Chelsea pensioners, they've got a special place, haven't they, in the nation's heart. They kind of really touch us in a special way, and it's been marvellous to talk to you today.
I think one of the things about the Royal Hospital, I mean, there's about 274 upwards pensioners in here, and they come from all walks. We've got cavalry, we've got artillery, we've got infantry, we've got engineers, signals, a couple of intelligence corps, and they cover a range of periods. We've got one guy who jumped at Arnhem, he's 99 years old. We've got two guys, one of whom escaped twice from the Germans in the Second World War.
Wow.
He celebrated his 100th birthday about 3 weeks ago. Another guy who was in Malaya, he celebrated his 100th birthday 3 weeks ago. And we got people from other conflicts. Now, I tend to feel embarrassed at times. You mention the pride people have in us, but people talk to me and say how grateful they are. But when I look at these guys and what they've done, they've been in all these wars, Aden, Korea, and that. When the Falklands was on, I was in Hong Kong. When the first Gulf War was on, I was in Hong Kong. But as people remind me, yes, but without what you did, they wouldn't have been there. So it is a joint effort that leads you to here. While at times it gets embarrassing, but we don't refuse the free drinks when people are fighting over it in the bar.
So they see your scarlet uniform and they know instantly, respect for our war veterans. Thank you so much, Brian. I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and thank you for supporting, because I know you do, this new initiative for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. Thank you. No, thank you. It's been my pleasure, Helen, and I hope people enjoy it.
This has been a production for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. To find out more and to support the NCMI, please visit ncmi.co.uk.